So Joe, this week I wanted to give you an update on the latest in internet weather. And looking at the most probe ports, we can actually see that not much has changed. We've got the same heavy hitters as from previous reports. We have the Ethereum wallet, the Android debug bridge, all the other ports. So I randomly picked one of these ports.
Stan, before, we're saying that, do you kind of agree that the reason we're not seeing much change in the top 10 is that just the volume of scanning on these same campaigns, botnets, these same actors is so high that even if there's something new, it's not able to crack the volume?
These are basically, exactly the top 10. So week over week, if you just compare the volumes, these are the biggest by volume.
Okay.
But I did make a promise on the last ThreatTraq that I'm going to go and try to analyze this other category. Right. So actually this week I did the top 20.
Okay.
Unfortunately, even here, there's not much to really look at. We've seen these as well in previous episodes of ThreatTraq. You have, I guess, 1911. That's the Niagara AX Tritium Fox protocol. There is some, I guess, information disclosure vulnerability there. So there's a lot of security researchers scanning there. I think what we discovered by looking at the top 20 is that it's ports that we've looked at previously. Everything is about the same except there's alternates. In the top 10, we saw MS SQL. In the top 20, we also see MySQL.
Yeah.
We saw RDP. And here we see VNC. So
right, and we're seeing the other web ports.
Yeah,
81
other
80 are in the top 10.
Other alternate
80,
web
80,
ports.
80, those are all sort of the same, probably similar things that you're scanning for on those that you're scanning for on 81 and 80.
Yeah, I think 8080, most people use that to scan for proxies, to see if there's any open proxies out there. But occasionally, it's got things like Apache Tomcat management interface or other. It's like an alternate web port. A lot of management interfaces are there. So a little bit hard to gauge exactly what's going on. Whereas with some of these other ports, it's a little bit simpler. So that's for the most probe ports. You could see that as you start breaking things down, these by volume are starting to get smaller, especially as compared to the top 10. And the other category now makes up, the bulk. So as you go to the top 100, let's say, is really the slivers are going to be very, very small. Maybe we'll try that one time.
I wonder if we could search just by the biggest change in volume, not so much by the top amount of volume, but the biggest week-to-week change in volume.
Yeah, I think that's something interesting to consider. Yeah. I think we'll have to try that.
Cool.
Maybe something to do next time I'm here. So now we're gonna redirect. I know this bar chart looks very similar, but actually this is organized by the most sources probing. So here I just picked 2 ports because nothing has really changed, just to revisit them and understand the activity that's happening. So the first is port 445 TCP. You could see this is going back 2 years, and you could see the activity has increased tremendously over the last 2 years, but in recent time periods it's kind of stabilized, so it's about the same. And our loyal listeners probably remember we talk about this port all the time. It has to do with WannaCry.
Well, actually, we briefed this slide in presentations, and the farthest back is actually remnants of Conficker, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And right around here where this spike is, that's when WannaCry came out and all the big articles about it. You could see it really went down. Actually, if you zoom in on that, you'll see how much it went down, but then slowly start creeping back up. And when you zoom into it, you could actually see this interesting pattern. It must be that it's a lot of machines that actual people use versus servers that stay up, because during the daytime you get more computers scanning probably as devices come online, and during the nighttime there's fewer devices scanning, and that's why you see this kind of weird dark blue and light blue pattern. It's really because of that. But you could see, looking back a few months, the activity is kind of the same.
It's interesting just to get more of a historical trend, like a real long-term trend of some of these real popular scanning ports and see how they've changed over time.
So the other port I wanted to look at was port 81 TCP, and I did the same thing since it's something that comes up a lot. I went and I looked at 720 days. So the likely targeting here is a vulnerability of go-ahead web servers. What I find interesting about this, actually around this time, there was a big article published about a big botnet that started, and you could see these are scan sources. So this is up to like 50,000 devices per hour scanning. So maybe 50,000 pieces, botnet participants. But then it went away and it spiked, and we covered this on ThreatTraq before. If you go back in time. What's happened since is the scanning activity, I know you can see it's just slightly increasing. Like if you look at, I guess maybe a year ago here, you're maybe 5,000 devices per hour scanning, but it's doubled in this year. And now there's 10,000 devices per hour scanning. The number of devices that are scanning for this port, probably associated with a botnet, has doubled in about a year's time, but very, very slowly, almost in a way that you haven't noticed, unless you're kind of paying attention and keeping track of it. And I actually wanted to dig into this a little bit further, and I checked our sensors for all what kind of activity is being observed on this port. And what I found out is that the activity we're seeing is very similar to the activity described in this blog post here. Okay. Very similar commands we're observing that leverage basically this exact vulnerability. The only thing that might be different today is that other commands are being issued. I guess in March it was something a little bit different. And if you just search for this port and vulnerabilities on it, you'll find heavy coverage in April by NetLab actually about this very same vulnerability. So it's still the same vulnerability being leveraged, just different commands being executed today.
Good work.
And that's it for the Internet Weather this week.
That's interesting. Thanks, Stan. Interesting stuff.